Hello, my brother. Welcome to the Great Man Within podcast. Every episode is designed to help you discover and live the great man within you. I'd like to welcome you to and prepare you for an ongoing conversation that we are going to be having on the show about how to become actively anti-racist. Now, let me be really clear right up front. I am no expert or authority when it comes to race-related issues or having race-related discussions. This is not my area of expertise, which is why anytime I come on the show to talk about race-related issues, that 80% of what you are going to hear comes directly from the experts, those who have dedicated their lives to race-related issues, from people of color who have lived this in their entire lives. I am merely a conduit, a bridge from their stories, their research, their lived experiences, to bring it to those of you who want to step off the sideline and get onto the field, to step up and speak out against injustices, to break systems of oppression that have kept people of color on the fringes of our society for far too long. The other 20% of that will be my own lived experience, so that you can connect with and relate to me as I grow through this process as well. Now, it's also important to acknowledge that our audience is far more diverse than just white men. We have men, women, those who don't identify in binary terms listen to this show. We have people from all different races, religions, sexual orientations from inside this country and outside this country. And so having a really pointed conversation directed at white men is quite intentional, not to exclude everyone else, but because of the fact that until white men, myself included, Brian included, until we get off the sideline and speak out and become part of the solution, nothing will ever change. Now, one of the big questions that the white community has been asking over the previous weeks is, why does this time feel so different? Why is it now that I feel ready to take that next step to become actively anti-racist, to come off of the sideline, to speak up? Why does this feel so different? Because it was only 6 years ago when Eric Garner and Michael Brown were senselessly murdered within 3 weeks of each other. And the country went into an uproar, but somehow that faded away in the eyes of the white community, because you better damn believe that the black community didn't forget that. So what really changed in the white community in response to those senseless deaths? And by the way, those weren't the only ones, not by a long shot, but those got national exposure and they happened so close together. What really changed in the white community? What really changed in my behavior? Right? I was incensed, I was appalled, and then I really didn't know what to do about it, nor did I actually take real active measures to go ask, to seek out, to educate myself. And then I had the privilege, and this is what it means to have white privilege, one of the things, of going back to my normal life pretty much unaffected, while the rest of the black community struggled and suffered to come to grips with the fact that there was no justice for lives being taken. This time is different. Ahmaud Arbery getting gunned down in the streets of Atlanta by two white men in broad daylight, and neither of those men were arrested for months until the New York Times started an independent report, which finally brought some justice, at least an arrest, to the forefront. Breonna Taylor, who was murdered in her bed while she was sleeping in Louisville, Kentucky, because police beat down her door looking for the wrong person in the wrong place. And no recourse, no arrests have been made for the police officers who broke down her door and took a life. And then George Floyd, whose neck was kneed upon by a police officer for 10 minutes while he was slowly choked out before our eyes, all caught on camera while he was gasping for his life. And incredibly, none of those police officers were arrested for days following the murder. And I believe at this point, there's still only one arrest that has been made. Of the 4 police officers were present, and it was the man who was kneeling on the neck of George Floyd. So what is it about this time that feels different? Based on my research, there's a few things, but one of the most important is the fact that this all happened during quarantine after months of being locked down, and we are as captive of an audience as we have ever been in our entire lives. So think about this for a moment. In your regular everyday life, when things were, quote, normal, you were traveling, you were eating out, you were socializing, you probably had more work to do. Not speaking for everybody, but more people seem to have more work back before the quarantine era. There were plenty of more distractions, but now you can't turn away from this. It's everywhere. On top of the fact that we have been sitting restless, anxious, nervous, stressed out. People have lost their jobs. And inordinately, the people who have suffered the most are people of color. These injustices have transpired against people of color over and over and over again. And in this crucible of experience, it's just one fucking thing after another. The powder keg has exploded and we have nowhere to go. We are forced to confront this. That's why this is going in more deeply, and it's happened in such a concentrated period of time. Another one of the reasons why this feels different this time is because each of these travesties that I just spoke of have all exposed a deeper layer of evil, of fucked upness, of systemic oppression that we weren't able to see nearly as clearly before, at least speaking from the white person's perspective. This might be painfully obvious to others in the Black community and other people of color, but for the white community, it seems like we are waking up and seeing things that have been invisible to us previously. For example, Trevor Noah of The Daily Show did this 18-minute video that he filmed on his iPhone and popped it on Instagram, and it was one of the most brilliant breakdowns of what is happening in our country today. And I'm going to link this in the show notes because I've sent it out to everyone in social media and said, please watch this. Commit to watching the first 4 minutes, and inevitably you will spend the rest of the following 14 minutes just wanting to absorb and hear every piece of wisdom that he shared. But he talks about the story of Amy Cooper, who is the white woman in Central Park who was confronted by Christian Cooper, who is an avid bird watcher, who wanted her to leash her dog because the dog was unleashed, and it was because he felt that the dog might threaten some of the wildlife that was up there. And he's just like a massive bird aficionado. And she turned nasty on him immediately and threatened 3 times by calling him an African-American man and said, I am going to call the police and I'm going to tell them an African-American man is threatening me. I'm going to tell them that an African-American man is threatening me. And she said it over and over and over again before she called. And what Trevor Noah broke down that I thought was so insightful, he said, that is a prime demonstration of a white woman who knows the system is fucked and rigged in her favor to the extent where she could use African-American as a threat, because she knows that if that is lobbied to a police officer, that chances are the game is going to be completely rigged in her favor. And yet, she doesn't have the awareness, the recognition that by doing so, she may have put his life in grave danger, as we've seen with the other cases that we just talked about. And it was so exposed, it was so visceral, like you could feel her nastiness, her weaponizing his race in order to get out of that experience. Whatever it was she was trying to do to control the experience, to assert power and authority over him. And she did so with recklessness and no concern to his life. And when white people saw that, it was unignorable of how fucked up that kind of behavior is. And it could no longer be ignored. And so it's been this confluence of events that have woken up many members of the white community who were previously on the sideline, who are now looking to step off and to become part of the solution. You know, I've been thinking about this one question that my men's group was batting around about a year ago when we were at a dinner together. And the question went something like this. What do you think our grandkids are going to be ashamed of us about how we're living our lives right now? And I remember we had some good answers about a year ago, but right now the answer has never been more clear. If I stayed silent while George Floyd was getting his life choked out of him on camera, while Ahmaud Arbery can be murdered in the streets without anyone being arrested, with Amy Cooper representing whiteness in Central Park by threatening race against a bird watcher who loved nature, who was confronting her in the most compassionate of ways, when this shit's going down on my watch, and if my grandkids were to look at this period of time and say, Grandpa, you didn't do anything about that, I should be fucking ashamed. 65 years ago, our country was still segregated. 65 or 66 years ago, our country was still segregated, right? I'm talking like grandparents. My grandparents lived in an era where white people sat at the front and black people sat at the back. Bathrooms were separate, right? Water fountains were separate, if there was even a water fountain for the black community. And I look back at that and I say, my God, there's no way I would have stood for that if I lived during that period of time. At least I'd like to believe that. And yet, how could I say that if I remained silent during this period of time? I would have right to be ashamed of myself. And quite frankly, I carry shame that it's taken me this long to speak out in this way. Now, our journey on this podcast around how to have better conversations around race began last year, I think in April of 2019, with a series of interviews I conducted with Daryl Davis, who is a black man who's gotten over 200 KKK members to give up their robes, their hoods, their ideology, and their hatred because they grew to love Daryl and they recognized that everything they'd based their life around was a lie. We continued that conversation this year with B. Arthur in an episode we released in February called How White Men Can Have Better Conversations About Race. And one of the things that she reminded both Brian and I on that episode was racism is not going to die on its own, guys. It has to be killed. And we need more white guys to help kill this thing, this beast, this albatross, this virus that has been infecting our communities for far too long. So at this point, you may be saying, okay, Dom, I'm ready to step off the sideline, but I don't know where to begin. What do I do beyond signing the petitions, beyond donating to the causes, beyond posting on social media? Like, how do I get started in actually becoming a bigger part of this change? And my answer back to you, which is coming directly from all of the communities that I spoke of at the beginning of this show, right? The experts, the activists, the people who have lived experience. Steps number 1, 2, and 3 right now are to educate ourselves. Educate ourselves before we go guns blazing to actually do the work. And what that means is, before making proclamations or throwing around opinions, have you followed 20 people on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook who are people of color, who are black activists, who have written books on race, who have dedicated their careers and lives to anti-racist teachings? Have you followed those people? Have you listened? Have you listened to the tone and the temperament of the movement that's going on right now? Are you on tone? Are you on point? Because if you're not, and you go and step up and speak out, you're going to sound woefully out of touch. And that's going to do more harm than good. Have you read the books? Have you watched the documentaries? The episode I'm going to release on Friday is going to give you all of the resources that I have immersed myself with. And I'm going to link in the show notes today a resource guide that is put together. I wish I know the reference of who put this together, but it is a beautiful resource library of books, documentaries, pages to follow, places where you can donate, causes to support, all in one spot. This is your focus for the indefinite future, is to educate yourself before you go out and make big proclamations. Because if you're a lot like most people in the white community, you have not been raised to have intentional conversations around racism. You've not been raised to sit in discomfort with racially challenging conversations. And so you can get yourself into a lot of hot water, into a lot of trouble, if you don't know what you're getting into. I've written out 4 guiding principles for myself as I move forward in having these kinds of conversations and doing more deep inner work around becoming actively anti-racist. And I want to share these with you. And these aren't the end all be all. These are just what I've come up with over the last few years. And I want to continue to refine these as I go forward. So number 1, and I shared this before, this came from B. Arthur on our episode in February. Racism won't die. It has to be killed. Racism will not die. It must be killed. And in order for it to be killed, I have to be part of that mission. The second principle is, I will not let discomfort keep me silent. I will not let discomfort keep me silent. I know for too long, for too many years, I was silent. I bit my tongue because I didn't want to face the blowback of being told that I was too uptight or that I needed to loosen up or someone was just joking, or not knowing how to speak out about it in a way that wasn't going to raise eyebrows or have someone call me out for maybe using the wrong word or for stepping on a landmine inadvertently. But in that process of me sitting on the sideline in my discomfort, more travesties have occurred, more oppression has occurred. People of color have suffered because I am unwilling to step towards my discomfort no longer, right? And I have to accept being ready to fuck up. And I guarantee you that on this show, this episode already, I've said some shit that wasn't right, that could be refined. And I would ask if you've caught me in saying something that was either out of line or could be done better, said better. I encourage you to send me an email at dominic@dominicq.com or go through doinnerwork.com. Reach out to me. Let me know how I can do better, because the only way that I can be a part of this in a helpful way is to make sure that I'm doing it in a helpful way. And there are many blind spots that I don't even know that I have yet. So email me, doinnerwork.com, dominic@dominicq.com. Let me know what better I could be doing. Principle number 3, commit to playing the long game. It's easy right now to pay attention because there's nothing else that's out there. The protests are in your face, the news cycle's in your face, but eventually something else is going to kick up. Something's going to distract us. Something's going to get our attention. And is this going to fade away just like too many other travesties have faded away before, where we go back to living our comfortable, normal, default lives? My friend Ngazi sent me a message and she said, I want you to recognize that our pain is not just a trend. It is not just for the moment. It has been here for many, many years. Which means, and these are my words now, which means that if anything is going to change, I have to commit for many, many years. Are you willing to join me on this journey? And my 4th and final principle is that I will be playing a support role, not a starring role, in this movement of racial change. And Ngazi turned me on to an Instagram post, an Instagram account maybe about a year ago now, called No White Saviors. And it was a confronting account for me to start following a year ago. But what they taught me was that many times in white people's efforts to get involved in racial change, we take over the stage. We make the story about us, about our heroic efforts and energy, and we once again marginalize the suffering, the pain, the hurt, the harm that people of color, that indigenous people, that black people have experienced since the beginning of time in this country. A prime example of white saviorism is the movie The Blind Side with Sandra Bullock, which is a feel-good movie for many people in the white community. And it was based on a true story of a man named Michael Orr, who is an orphan who was taken in by a white family and who was given a second chance because he was on his own without a family and he was wayward, living in orphanages. And he grew up and became an exceptional tackle, an offensive tackle in college, and then was drafted by the Baltimore Ravens and had a pretty distinguished career. But in the movie, the way that it was portrayed was that Michael Orr was just some giant oaf, unintelligent, that was being educated by like the family's young boy who was like 10 years younger than him, teaching him math. And at the center of the story It was Sandra Bullock, right? The white savior who came in and helped rescue a black boy from himself. And it's a story about us feeling good about ourselves. And Michael Orr, the man who the movie is about, won't even watch the movie. He shuns the movie because of the portrayal in that. And yet still so many of us love that movie. That's an example of white saviorism. And when we can start to see this stuff, it changes our perspective on the media that we watch, or the movies that we watch, and the media that we consume. So I will be playing a supporting role, not a starring role in the show. And once again, this is my call to my people of color who are listening right now. Please reach out to me and let me know how I can be saying things differently, how I can be doing things differently, how I can be positioning things more effectively. Whatever you think will support the cause, I am here not to be defensive, but to listen with open ears, an open mind, and an open heart. Now, in the next episode, I'm going to be breaking down some of the most important books I've read, most important documentaries that I've watched, most important research that I've come across to help me become actively anti-racist. And I'll be also sharing with you a series of either 5, 6, or 7 questions that are emerging as questions from the white community. They're asking, what do I do when? How do I become more actively anti-racist? How do I deal with when I say something and I get pulverized for the thing that I said in a social setting? What do I do when I fuck up? Or what do I do because I'm so angry at being called out when I think that's unfair? What do I do when? I'm going to be answering those questions on Friday based on the counsel and the coaching of what I've received, again, from the experts, from people who have lived this experience their entire lives and who have built their entire lives and careers around training others around this. And finally, one of the most important things to understand is that white people cannot stay stuck in an echo chamber of only talking to other white people about race. That's why it's so important in these episodes that you hear directly from members of the Black community, the Indigenous community, people of color. And today, I'm proud to bring you one of your own, one of the great Man Within podcast listeners, actually one of our most devoted listeners who has been here almost since the beginning and who I've developed a friendship with over the last year, talking about pretty much everything except for race up until recent weeks, Joel Buckner. Joel's heart is as big as the ocean. He's a talented musician, and he's a man in his communities that other people look to in times like this where they need leadership. And Joel wrote something that I found so profound that I asked him if he would read it and record it, and if I would use his audio recording to close out this episode, and he graciously agreed to. Now, as you listen, I encourage you to pay particular attention to the emotion that you can detect inside of Joel as he himself is going through this experience. See if you can be empathetic and connect with him and his experience and tune in to what he's feeling right now. And then also, I'd encourage you to listen to what he's challenging the white community to do in this time, in this era, to be actively anti-racist.
I took some time from social media last week as things unfolded about the murder of George Floyd. Again, I find myself in a numb place thinking, how do we get here again? Quickly, I recalled the quote by Albert Einstein: the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. So this time I'm committed to listening, learning my history, and investing more in my community. I've also come to the understanding that racism is a man-made system of power that has been instituted to keep people groups in subservient positions. In order to break racism, it's going to take the voice and action of those who have benefited from this system to make change happen. Now, it's my responsibility as a Black man to not allow bitterness to set in my heart. However, to break this cycle, I want to challenge my white brothers and sisters to learn the truth of our history. Speak up in the middle of conversations where you see power at work. And that might mean in a boardroom where there are 10 white men sitting together and you hear words that are spoken or see strategies that are not including all people. You standing up and being bold and saying, this is not right. this thought or this strategy is unjust to those that live in our country. Have conversations with brown and black people to learn their experiences. And then in the middle of the process, give yourself space to mess up and not always have the right words. See, I've been in church my whole life and am the son of a pastor. But I also now realize to the church, it's time for us to repent. There have been many ways where the church has been complicit in condoning racism, from our worship to our gatherings to colonization and to the lack of theological understanding. We must also take the responsibility for how we are a part of the problem. Today I read this and I'm tired. I'm tired because this is an issue and a truth of our nation that I've had to deal with for years. But equally, I'm full of joy. And today I'm believing for a better day ahead.